Hi mini enthusiasts, how are you doing? Hope you're having a great day. And in this update, Mark is doing the head gasket on his ERA Turbo Mini, which is called Phil. So there's been lots of speculation recently after we finished the kit build of what the next project will be, and you may well be looking at it. So can't guarantee it, but the ERA is definitely in plan for a restoration. Now it doesn't look that bad, and it's not that bad, but it is just a bit tired and in need of a refresh. But in typical Mark style, a refresh means it needs to be perfect, so it will undergo a full restoration at some point. Pretty sure that'll be the next project. So you might be wondering what we're doing now, or what Mark's doing now, doing the head gasket on it. Well, that's because it's booked for a couple of events this year before the restoration starts, and the first one of them is the National Mini Cooper Day at Bewley, which is this coming weekend. So this is last weekend where Mark is working on the ERA. Unfortunately, took it on the London to Brighton mini run, and it started to run noticeably hot, and then lost some coolant out the header tank, and then Mark noticed some emulsification of the oil, so water mixed with the oil in the rocker cover. Now that is not uncommon if a car's not used and it's laid out and it's in a damp environment, but Phil, the ERA, is always kept in a warm heated garage, so it's a little bit unusual. So those are kind of the alarm bells ringing straight away. It also was smoking white smoke out the exhaust as well, and generally blue smoke out the exhaust is oil, black smoke is fuel, black or grey is fuel where it's running too rich, and if it's white smoke it's steam. That steam really is only going to come internally from within the engine, so a head gasket, a head crack, a problem with the block or something like that. So pretty convinced it did have a head gasket gone or failing on it. Mark's taken the plunge, decided to get it done before the National Mini Cooper Day at Bewley. So for Mark, this is the first ever head gasket he's done. He's never done a head gasket before in his life. And they're just showing the heat shield. That fits beneath the SU carburettor and above the turbo. Obviously looks in a bit of a state there. That really is there just to stop heat soak up into the carburettor. Just looking at the tops of the pistons there, as you can see, number 3 looks very clean and is washed, and that corresponds with the head as well. So that just confirms what we thought, that the head gasket was leaking on cylinder number 3 there. It's pretty evident. And I think here when Mark pulls off the head gasket, you can see a definite point of failure, which is up on that number 3 near where the head bolt goes. The good thing about that is it eliminates the possibility, although it could still be possible, of having further problems, but it's nice to see a definite failure somewhere. And as you can see, the head gasket's distorted there around number 3. So that's good news. It's good to see why a head gasket's failed, and it was obviously worthwhile taking it apart. So as I might have mentioned, this really is a temporary fix, because the car's going to probably get completely overhauled come the end of this year and during the winter. So this is really just to get it by for another 2 or 3 shows maybe. And as I said, this is Mark's first ever head gasket, so I was giving a bit of guidance on the phone and via text. Obviously just cleaned off the block there, um, with just some wet and dry on a flat surface to make sure you don't distort the block. When doing a head gasket job like this, it's all about cleanliness, especially when you're reassembling. The gasket faces, particularly the block and the head, need to be perfectly clean. As you can see there, that's the old head. Now fortunately, Mark has a reconditioned head ready to go, which he bought for the restoration of the ERA. So rather than fit that on later, it's going on now. Did find a problem in a moment in that Mark bought it advertised as an ERA head, and technically it is, or is not, it's a Metro Turbo head, which is not a problem because the ERA head was a Metro Turbo head, but it was drilled at the far end for the heater takeoff, or what would be the heater takeoff, but on an ERA that's used for the secondary radiator. So that head didn't, or wasn't drilled at the heater valve end. So Mark spoke to me about it, and yeah, I just told him to drill it out. There are a few things which define a turbo head, so it's stamped with a T on the heater valve end. Obviously it has larger sodium filled exhausts, sodium filled exhaust valves, and they're just to aid cooling. So for a first head gasket, it's a really horrible one to do actually. An ERA is not a nice mini to work on. It's cramped under the bonnet, there's hardly any room, and just lots of fiddly bolts and things like that. I mean, not as bad as modern cars, but as far as minis go, it's probably one of the worst head gaskets to do on an A-series engine inside the car. So a bit of background on Phil, the ERA. So it's number 51, and they built around about 100 UK spec cars, and there are around, I think, either between 350 and 400 Japanese spec cars. So the UK cars are different to the Japanese spec cars in that they have a narrower body kit. The body kit actually looks nicer, I think, on the UK cars. On the Japanese cars it had a much wider body kit, and that was because the Japanese regulations say the whole wheel and tyre has to be covered when turning. The ERA cars have a number plate plinth on the front of them for the square number plate for a Japanese car, and more importantly the Japanese spec cars had air conditioning on them, so it was even more cramped than a UK spec car under the bonnet. Apart from that, UK spec or Japanese spec ERAs are pretty similar. They did I think they put catalytic converters on Japanese spec ERAs, but don't quote me on that. They certainly did on a few of the early UK press cars that went over to Japan. I know because I owned one. So like I say, this ERA, being a UK spec one, is rare, very rare. ERAs are like hen's teeth anyway, and they were originally conceived as sort of the 1980s replacement for the original Mini Cooper S. So they were designed and developed in the late 80s and made by a company called ERA. I think it's Engineering Research Applications in Dunstable, in time for the 30th anniversary of the Mini. So they were released for sale around about 1989. I think they were produced between 1989 and 1990. and they were a very expensive car at the time. I think a standard ERA was knocking on £13,000, and by the time you added leather, which was an option to that, it took them up to about £13,500. But they were, and still are, the fastest accelerating, fastest top speed, and most powerful production Mini ever made. So it was faster than any Cooper S, 1275 GT. Yeah, it was the fastest and arguably the most luxurious as well, because there was quite a few interior modifications done to them. Yeah, which makes them quite a special car. I've owned two of them. I'm lucky enough to have owned two of them. They are very nice cars, very nice to drive. Body kit and styling is not to everyone's liking. It's very 80s looking, but I think when you get in one and drive it, they put a lot of effort into engineering it and getting it perfectly right. So apologies, I seem to have waffled through a big chunk of detail here, which was not actually captured on the video, and there was a bit of a disaster with the new head. So when Mark went to tighten up the takeoff pipe, which goes on the heater valve end of the engine, it cracked the head. What a complete disaster. So I think what happened is there was some grease or oil down the hole. It's only a 3/8 bolt that goes down into there. Mark said he tightened it up. The bolt sort of tightened up 90% of the way. He gave it a bit more effort just to tighten it up. The last sort of probably thread and a half, I heard a crack and saw a puff of sort of rusty smoke come out the side or end of the head, and believe it or not, it cracked the cylinder head down from where the bolt is. Now, I mean, I've never seen that before. I was absolutely gobsmacked when Mark phoned me, and Mark on the phone sounded like he was about to cry actually. So yeah, complete disaster. So that reconditioned head had to come back off again, and unfortunately when Mark had cracked the head, by the time it got that far, the job was pretty much almost done. Luckily enough, as I say, the old head was okay. Mark was just replacing it at due course really, because he had a spare. So it just meant cleaning up the existing head which was on the car and then doing the job again basically. So you can just see me wandering around here. I wasn't helping Mark at this stage, although I've just started now. I was down there just doing the tracking and wheel alignment on kit. So this is after London to Brighton. Just some last minute bits we didn't get to do on kit, which was the wheel alignment, and doing some work on Bolt in the background there. So frustratingly, Bolt had a brand new starter motor. It's a high torque starter motor last year when we built it, and that starter motor has burned out already. So yeah, it was just out of warranty as well, just more than 12 months old. So a little bit disappointed in that. I think it was a Bryce. Is it Bryce? I'm not sure, but it was a high torque starter motor anyway. They're not cheap, they're good quality, and yeah, a bit disappointing that it failed. I mean, it just gave all the symptoms of a flat battery, and we'd replace the battery, then put a booster pack on it, and it was still struggling to start. Tested how many amps the start motor was drawing, and it was like 180, 200 amps, and the engine was barely turning over. So it put a new start motor on it, and it fired on the button and has been perfectly okay since. So we're getting to the end of the head gasket work now. Mark's just refilling the ERA with fluids. Getting it all finished up. So for Mark, a little bit gutting this because he's almost like he's done the head gasket twice here. And if the ERA does end up being the next big project we do together, it's going to be quite epic. It's not like building a project car like we did with Kit or Bolt. The ERA, because of their rarity, very difficult to get parts for them. It really is going to be a nut and bolt restoration where a lot of the original parts, or pretty much all the original parts, are going to need to be retained, refurbished and restored. All the little brackets, the body kit, etc. So if I get a chance, maybe I'll do a video and give a bit more detail on this ERA and just ERAs in general, because they are pretty special cars. And I say not a lot of people know what they are, but I think they do now. They're pretty well renowned. So it started up okay. It is a little bit lumpy on idle, but once it warms up, it's okay. So that might be a leaky exhaust valve or something like that. But like I say, not too worried about it, because it is just a case of getting it running to do a few shows with it, and it will all be coming apart again. So I was lucky enough to be entrusted to give it the road test. I think just my experience, I know what to look for, what to listen for, and having owned a couple of ERAs before, I know what they should feel and drive like. So it was a pleasure. You know, some things to look out for: just oil pressure, water temperature, oil temperature if you've got a gauge, which you do have on an ERA. So it was quite an enjoyable road test. So I'll shut up and you can listen to the lovely sound of the ERA engine. So there we go. Sounds pretty cool, speeded up, doesn't it? Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I appreciate time lapses like this can be a little bit boring, but great to see an ERA being worked on, I think. Thanks for watching. Catch up with you soon, and hopefully you'll be able to see the car at Bewley National Mini Cooper Day. Cheers. Bye.